So, and then does it mean I failed at this lifetime, right? Because all cults have defined a certain thing where if you leave the cult, right, they have to hold it that you're going down, right? Because it's too crazy making to say that we all know that this is the right way and that the most evolved people and all this are doing this way. But you're doing it differently. Are you more evolved than us? Well, then what are we doing here? Are you less evolved than us? What's happening, right? This is a conundrum that anyone leaving Lazaris as the primary relationship, right? Because that's the highest, to make your spirituality the highest relationship, the only relationship. Well, what about all these people? What about all these other books, right? So there's shame. And so I felt a good wave of this, like there's all this stuff that I want to talk about. That's what I'm doing here to a camera, right? Because there aren't any Lazaris friends to talk about this with, right? Because if there were, I would have been talking with them, right? But cameras don't have judgments. Cameras don't say, have you worked with your negative ego recently? See, because all a Lazaris friend has to do, or all a Lazaris bully has to do, if they don't want to hear what's going on or listen to the data or consider something or learn what's better or anything like that, all they have to do is say, have you worked with your negative ego recently? Yes, I did. I did that 2 weeks ago. Well, probably you didn't do it good enough, but what about releasing self-pity? Well, as a matter of fact, I found that pity parties release self-pity and are a great deal of fun. Do you want to try one? Oh, no, that's not one of Lazaris' techniques. We're not doing that. Obviously, that's not sanctioned by Lazaris, and he does probably know way more than you, being a timeless being from the blah, 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 blah. But okay, you're doing, and how about miraculous success? Have you done that one recently? I haven't gotten around to doing that. Well, now that I don't have to listen to you, why don't you go do that, right? And in 3 months, if it hasn't worked out, I don't want to hear about it, right? Because I'll be off with the people pretending that this is miraculously changing my life and talking about serendipities in the parking, Why don't you do that? And then we just won't invite you around because it's a bad vibe. It's a bad vibe, right? And and gratitude attracts, by the way. So you might try being grateful for all the things that Lazaris did, rather than focusing on the areas that don't work. Because what you focus on, that's what you create, right? You pretty much got all the things covered, don't you, right? We're going to get rid of you because you had the temerity to bring up the vast amount of anomalous data across the board about all the ineffectiveness of Lazaris and concept synergy and the Lazaris techniques, right? I've had better friendships than my friendship with Lazaris, right? I've had more balanced relationships than this. I've had healthier company relationships than concept synergy. I've had healthier lover relationships than with Lazaris friends. And I've enjoyed myself more and been more successful listening to this and this and this. And that's kind of relevant. And nobody is interested in doing a statistical study to see, like, let's say you study with Lazaris for 20 years. Are you less likely to get cancer, more likely to live longer, more likely to earn more money? There's plenty of rich people that have time to go to Lazaris events and buy expensive crystals because they've already made money. But are there lots of people, going from nothing to money within Lazaris. And how does that correspond to Tony Robbins followers or this? Is anyone interested in that? I am. I'd love to know, because in my experience, it's the same with therapists or energy healers. They all say to come to them. That's the answer, right? Well, I help people like that. They all say that. But did you know that you're good at stopping back pains with your energy work, and you're not very good at healing depression? But this other person is good at healing depression, and they have no impact on my back spasm. Did you know that? No, I didn't know that. Well, are you asking anyone what you're good at? No. You're interested in participating in an objective study where all your clients are interviewed to see what's gone well and how many people have left and didn't get any benefit. And if people could get all the money back and all the time back, how many would do that and do it in something else? Right? There's tons and tons of Lazaris people statistically. I don't know if it's 20, 30, 40, 50% that would take the money back rather than, and give up the money they spent at Concept Synergy. And that's particularly the case in crystals. That's where I've heard it the most vehemently. If only I had the money and could give the crystals back and this, that, and the other. I understand it. You mark up a product 1,000% and sell them to your friends. It's obviously a bit disconcerting to understand that that's, the case. And when you realize that just because you gave Concept Synergy a lot of money easily, it isn't automatically easier to make that money, right? And if it does, it may not have anything to do with listening to the elegance of abundance, and it may have to do with reading a book on goals or learning to be good at sales, for example. So there's a range of stuff there. But just the fact that I've spent, decades and hundreds of thousands of dollars in time off work, money buying crystals, going to events, listening to tapes, and there's all these questions, and there's no interest within that whole circle to resolve that. Like, Lazaris has never thought it would be appropriate to make a recorded weekend where people that found other techniques outside of Lazaris that worked a lot better could share what those were or why the Lazaris techniques didn't work for them, or just ask Lazaris these questions. Never, right? You can submit them to the books on community questions. They just will not be answered, right? Because that would bring these things to light, right? And so when you realize that the commitment to not hearing and dealing with this from the people who publish books on excellence and responsibility and creating your reality and listening to whispers and all this stuff, which you'd think is pretty loud, right? It's pretty loud. We won't open your email, we won't do this and this, so okay, let's hear it on YouTube, right? Getting louder, right? You would think that somebody would want to listen to any of those whispers. But no. The only people that want to listen to them are ex-Lazaris friends who say it was all a bunch of crap, right? But that's not necessarily helpful, because I don't think it is a bunch of crap, right? I mean, obviously you can say America is filled with crap, as a cult and all its stupidity and all that, right? But it's not so black and white. You can look at me or you or any relationship and say, oh, that's full of crap, right? Well, first of all life comes from crap, right? It's a remarkable cult little game to take the sources of all life, fucking shit, bullshit, right? We're talking about fertilizer, source of all life, and, then orifices, dick, cunt, Why is the source of all life a curse, right? Fucking, source of all life. Fertilizer, the source of all life. Your body parts that conceive of life, the source of all life. it's a very schizophrenic dynamic when the source of all life becomes viewed as a curse word. But all of our curse words are referencing the source of all life. Right? So it's a very odd thing, even bitch, like what's wrong? Dogs are so much nicer than so many people. I mean, you should be proud to be a bitch. I mean, but it's not even literal, right? Dogs are nice, bring a tremendous amount of happiness, right? So let's call someone who's not nice a dog. I mean, these are crazy-making things that really don't add up. But the fact that no one wants to talk about these things, the fact that no one is interested in a study, and that the only people interested say the whole thing was a fucked up waste of time, I mean, I've gotten over it. There's shame there because I don't think it was a complete waste of time. I would have done things differently if I had the benefit of watching these videos first. I also think it would have been an eye-opener to me if I'd shown the news and what was going on in the world at this time and said, by the way, just so you know, this is what Lazaris is talking about as the New Age. There's the particulate count in the atmosphere, here's the temperature range, here's the level of hurricanes in the New Age, here's the level of this, here's the level of politicking, divide, this. That's the New Age, right? So when Lazaris is saying it's really exciting and the gate of Sirius is open, I mean, whether you like it or not, good, bad, there's also the internet, there's this, there's that, but this is it, right? I mean, it's certainly not anything close to what I imagined or expected. So another one of Lazaris's things not seeming to pan out, right? That you create reality with who you desire, you imagine, you expect, but I don't desire, imagine, or expect this reality when working with Lazaris in my teenage years and 20s, etc. And it's now coming to be a trend that I expect, but not particularly desire, right? And so, well, let's look at that, right? So there's waves of shame. And so a video like this will be like, who are these crazy people? So that'll be one spectrum of, thing like, who are these crazy people believing channeled entities? I mean, duh. To victim, like you're scammed by these organizations, of course they charge us money for all these things, whether they work or not. You don't get a refund. Aspirin couldn't get away from that. I mean, they sue the OxyContin family for promising they weren't addictive, and then they were, and we do a study and said, but let's just not do a study, right? And then you're just you're the negative ego who hasn't learned to generate by gratitude, who's failed to create their reality, and all these things add shame because they suggest that there's something not right with you. There's nothing wrong with Lazaris, and there's nothing wrong with concept synergy, and there's nothing wrong with all this anomalous data. Something's wrong with you, that you didn't get it. You didn't do it right. It could have been done, right? Now, nobody's done it, but it could have been done, right? It could have been. Like, absolutely no one's living eternally. But any of you could have done it, right? You all failed, right? And there's some of these things are pretty glaring, right? And obviously Lazaris has stopped those workshops, right? They're easier to do when you're in your 30s and 40s. By the way, we could live eternally, right? 70s, Jach getting older by the day, not so much, right? Gee, I saw you 20 years ago. You're aging just the same as everyone else. Let's just stop doing that workshop, right? But what about the people who paid to go to that workshop and are getting old like everyone else, right? Do they get a refund? Does Lazaris say our techniques don't work? We apologize. And that is, I think, also a layer of shame. Lazaris doesn't make mistakes, and he talked about this in the shame-based parenting thing. Now, there's two levels of shame around here. One is Lazaris says they're not their parent. Lazaris says, we're not your parents. So just so you know, Lazaris isn't your parents. But what Lazaris doesn't say is that anyone who's traumatically regressed is psychologically a child, and anyone who is psychologically a child views grown-ups as parents and looks for a parental figure, and who better figure than the one outside the set whose techniques work, who's the highest resonance to ever touch this planet, and who doesn't have pain and suffering, and who's here to be your friend for all life, for all eternity. Who better parent than that if you're a regressed, traumatized 6-year-old? So Lazaris doesn't point out that nobody's going to listen to him. In other words, it's like a hiking guide taking money to lead people on a hike and saying, we're not a hiking guide. Sign a waiver here. We're not a hiking guide. By the way, we have more hiking experience than anyone on the planet. And we're going on a hike. And I'm going to take your money to go on this hike, but we are not a hiking guide. Everyone got that? Okay, let's go for a hike. Oh, you sprained your ankle. Well, don't look at me. I'm not a hiking guide. So there's definitely that dynamic, right? But nobody can talk about it, right? Because this can't be talked about and integrated, right? And there's also a tremendous amount of shame in the circle of people who won't make a recording like this because they believe it would make them look unspiritual. Because if they were really spiritual, they wouldn't be having these problems and, all that. So there's a lot of cancellation with, with this type of dynamic. And it's not necessarily good for either party. I was talking with one former lover who's a Lazar friend, and her first response was, "You're in negative ego." But because I'd thought it through and all this, I said, well, let's look at that, right? I'm doing this, 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 and this. Makes sense to me. Your response is this and this and this, and judgment and criticism. You're not listening to the point here. So then she flipped it. Then she said, I'm in negative ego. I apologize. But then, okay, what do you do when you're in negative ego after decades of working with the Lazaris material? You go off and be ashamed and fail, right? It just wasn't a useful comment. All you had to do was look and examine the data points and see, does it make sense? Or do you understand it? Do you have a response? If you don't, fine. Deciding who is and isn't in negative ego, it wasn't useful when she gave it to me, so I gave it back. She gave it to herself then, but I didn't think that was useful either. Just get rid of that, right? But then you have to do the taboo thing. You have to admit maybe Lazaris's box of systems doesn't work in this situation. Maybe it's not ideal. Maybe it works some of the time. Every system works some of the time with some of the people. And every system fails some of the time with some of the people. There isn't a single system that you can just blanket do that, right? Even aspirin, right? Some of the time, people with certain blood thing and this and that, it's not a good thing. Right? So no system works all the time with all the people. That's the nature of systems. Lazaris has created hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of systems. None of them work all the time with all the people, right? But Lazaris doesn't say that, which is obvious. He says his techniques work. So, that's, that dumps the shame onto in other words, when it fails, Lazaris has even talked about that one of the ways you shame a child is you ask them to do something they can't do. And then you pretend that you've done nothing wrong. Another one is you pretend you've made no mistakes. Right? We told you you were free of cancer, you're riddled with it. Do we apologize? No, we just don't talk about it, right? That's a mistake, right? So if Lazaris doesn't speak about all of their mistakes, at least within the paradigm that we think of them, does that give the mistake to the other in a way that they can't solve because it just wasn't the right technique for that person for whatever reason? And Lazaris said it was, as a blanket statement. So I think that if I threw out the Lazaris thing entirely, there would just be the one shame that said, I was an idiot, I was a teenager, what do you expect? People have been gullibly falling for cults and techniques and stuff for money for thousands of years. It's not going to change anytime soon. And, at least you got a few things out of it. You had some nice experiences and, your life isn't too fucked up. And a few of them even worked sometimes. So that's just life, right? That'd be one. And then all the other ones just laugh off and forget. But despite all of this, I still think that the world is a better place because Lazaris exists than they don't. That there's probably plenty of people that would have found worse cults to belong to because there are plenty of regressed, traumatized people that need a cult. And there's plenty of cults worse than the cult of Lazaris. Or the Lazaris dogma cult, right? Where you just join the club of sending tapes back and forth and seeing who's going to be left holding it, right? The person who complains the most will get the most tape recommendations, and then they'll feel like shit when they don't do 30 techniques, and they'll just shut up about it for a while, and then, someone else will start complaining, and then everyone gets to say, well, have you tried this tape? Have you tried that tape, right? You got a few thousand tapes that can be infinitely done with infinite reasons why they haven't been done, and you create it all. You've got an endless arsenal of reasons not to listen to people. And most of the time, the sad thing is that one person actually listening and understanding is way better than 1,000 tapes, most of the time, right? So a little dirty secret there. Meaning I have been helped by a few empathic, kind people who have wanted to understand and listen. I have been helped reliably in a matter of 30 or 40 minutes. More than many of the entire tapes and going through the whole protocol. Right? So, right? Why not teach the art of friendship and practice? What you get better at is you practice, right? So Lazaris promptly says, just take notes and don't practice it, right? In theory, practice, but why not practice at the workshops and actually get good at being heard and all of that, So I think it's, there's some shame either way, because I think that Lazaris is a better cult leader than most of them. Let's say 99. Let's say Lazaris is in the top 1% of cult leaders. And there are many worse companies or organizations than Concept Synergy. Concept Synergy may be deflecting, shame-based, abuse its staff, but it gets them, it's not as bad as Castaneda's group, right? Castaneda's group and the amount of sexual abuse and bullying that went on, and fallout and death, happening around different people trying, so that Castaneda could have sex with various women and in different towns and all that. That seems worse than concept synergy. Catholic Church, worse than concept synergy. I mean, and there's plenty of good stuff about the Catholic Church, and there's plenty of good stuff about Castaneda. Lazaris has praised Don Juan's, mythological trajectory, right? But he's also praised Penny and concepts in Jach and all that, right? So it is uneasy. I would say my ego is not happy with all this anomalous data. It is, I think, harder to look at all this and say there's something there. But that's, but then there's the shame of not being heard. I don't even want to try to go to another Lazaris event, before Jach dies, because my experience of the cliquish nature within the community is such that I think I would just spend a lot of time wondering who is judging or complaining, etc., about this. And it'd be easier just to, work with a meditation that I like, at home. But there's also, that is then a sense of excluding myself in anticipation of being excluded based on the experiences of being excluded repeatedly within the Jach, Lazaris, concept synergy, Lazaris friend community, right? So whether it's Jach rejecting me, Lazaris rejecting my questions, etc., or concept synergy rejecting, deflecting, minimizing, or any of the Lazaris friends that I've tried to talk with about this. So in that sense, the shame is lower being with ex-Lazaris friends, although there's then some shame in the other, that some of them would be angry that I would still value aspects of my relationship with Lazaris. Or some of the consensus, neighbors, whatever, that would say, what, they put you through all that? They're that incompetent and you still think they're worth something? You might recommend a friend to them in some situations? Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth a try. It's worth looking at the data. And I think there's some humiliation around that. Because it's not an honoring thing. Anomalous data is unwelcome within the entire Lazaris community. But there's tons of it. And we're supposed to pursue beauty, truth, and goodness, right? Or this, it's just all this schizophrenia stuff. So I'm working with Lazaris's tape in bits and pieces. It's a bit of an experiment to see how medicinal or toxic it is and in what ways on adult shame right now. And so this is kind of helping me understand the adult shame that I'm dealing with in my body, in my relationship with Lazaris, concept synergy, and the Lazaris community, and the Lazaris X community, and the larger consensus of people that think it's all nonsense or that it's demonic. So there's different messages of diminishment and inadequacy from all sides. And I think the healthiest thing would, of course, be the healthiest, strongest, most confident cultures embrace the anomalous data, acknowledge it, are not threatened by it, and just say, you know, as long as we use language and stuff, it's not gonna be 100% useful, pure, etc. But it's hopefully better than nothing. And more importantly, you know, I do think that science has a lot to offer with measurements of where, like, is there a demographic that Lazaris is more likely to be useful for than not? Is it an American? Is it a European? Is it a male? Is it a woman? Is it a certain age group? Is there an area where Lazaris is likely to be least helpful, and you know, and that type of thing? And it'd be great to keep those as ongoing living statistics that people can put in their stuff and we can all learn from, because that raises consciousness. It also shows belief. Like, I do believe that there's something that's useful, that's good in all of this type of dynamic. And I think there's something that's shaming, and I think there's something that's painful, and I think there's something that's lonely. I mean, we're not getting into all of that, but obviously it's lonely to be part of a small network of belief, which anyone who believes all that Lazaris says is in a very small network of less than 1% of the population. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. And the fear of loneliness is such that I think that most people will not embrace the shadow side of the relationship with other Lazaris friends or concept synergy, or Lazaris. And who else do they have when most other people think it's a bunch of bunk? So, yeah, I have a little better sense of where the pain is in my chest and how it's built up, and also sadness about that pain and the loneliness of not knowing what to do with that pain. Because another, you know, source of shame is Lazaris will say, be an adult, you've got to be an adult and all that. How about it, right? Let's have some examples, right? But it's a lot of work to become even partially an adult versus just a grown-up teenager, child, or young adult. And Lazaris's techniques have been, I would say that the main input from all Lazaris's comments about adulthood, I would say that mostly I felt shame and fear. So that's been the impact of the entire history of comments around that. But I actually learned about adulthood with mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, because I actually met myself and met a loving me that I could then differentiate with my ego, right? I never got that in a single Lazaris event. And so, you know, so a few mushroom experiences doing more than thousands and thousands of hours of Lazaris experience. Well, that's a bit crazy making, right? Because Lazaris is not recommending mushrooms. Other people do, right? For those various reasons, right? But, you know, what kind of a friend is it that would not share the actual best techniques for something? I do recommend caution in terms of, I think you should fully understand at least 100 hours of what can go wrong with psychedelics, because that anything potent can go excellent or horrible, but Lazaris should really like that. If Lazaris likes nightmares or dreams, psychedelics, they are not mediocre. They will be nightmarish or ecstatic. They will not be mediocre, right? So this should be Lazaris's main technique. Yeah. So it's good to be aware of what's in this territory, and my background motivation and drive is to. Oh yeah, so I was saying, so that whole adult thing wasn't very useful. I would say that making this channel has helped me grow up in my relationship with Lazaris more than all the Lazaris tapes combined. So I guess I would say if you're feeling in any way a shame, fear, child or adolescent relationship with Lazaris, afraid of what they would think, judging yourself, oh, maybe I'm a negative ego, make a channel and talk about it. And if you're in child, you will feel like you're going to die. I did. And after a year or so, you'll notice you're not dead, right? Still here. And then, there's a slow growing up process, but it does include antipathy. It does include rebellion to become a teenager, right? And then that includes talking things through, and so then coming into synthesis of some kind. Take care.